Okay, so let me just tackle the elephant in the room, because I think everybody most likely is aware of some of the things of this episode of Overlord because of the general reaction of the community, because I've already been spammed by you Chibits in my private message box, Twitter, Facebook. I've heard it. And so I went into the episode and I got to see it for myself and see what everybody was talking about when it came to this episode of Overlord. So let me just tackle it. Everybody is talking about how this episode of Overlord was rushed. Now, I would be lying to you if I said that this was a perfectly adapted episode. I would be lying to you if I said it was perfect. But nothing's perfect, but still, I'd be lying and saying this was beautifully adapted. Thing is, okay, even though this episode was rushed, and I am slightly disappointed in some regards, it was an enjoyable episode in many different ways. But there is some things I need to clarify, because there is going to be anime-onlys that are going to be kind of confused with this episode and not really understand the full grasp of what this episode was really trying to do, and why some light novel readers are kind of upset about this episode. So let me clarify that, and then I will talk about the episode. So the main points that you want to really take note of that's really important that was not really in this episode is that Shalltear's form, her transformation is probably going to be a surprise for many when it comes to anime-onlys, because she looks very vile, disgusting, and I mean, if you watch the opening song, you kind of saw a glimpse at Shalltear's true form, because you see, like, that demonic-looking face pop up in the opening song. And so I feel like if you've watched the opening song and looked at it, most likely you already noticed what Shalltear's form might have looked like. But this form most likely comes as a surprise, because many are probably asking, like, okay, so what the fuck does this form mean? What's going on? And why should I care? Well, the thing is, Shalltear has this racial passive trait. For instance, as you know, in RPGs, MMOs, different things like that, let's say if you were to choose a goblin, or let's say you choose a gnome, or, you know, anything like that, like, usually goblins and gnomes might have a higher intelligence passive, or maybe the goblins might have it to where they can get more money out of you because they know how to work the system. You get my point. There's different type of passives for different races and creatures, and that's kind of where Shalltear comes in, since she is a vampire, and I forget the exact title to her race, but she is a type of creature that has this blood frenzy passive trait, and this blood frenzy is where she goes into bloodlust. And the vision we saw in the first person perspective in this episode, when you saw the red glare all in the room, you saw Shalltear looking around and the entire screen was red, it was to emphasize that she was in blood frenzy mode, or bloodlust. She had a lot of bloodlust, and she kind of lost real reason to really continue on, and it's kind of a negative effect when it comes to her type of race. For instance, she can't really control that. Like, she can, but can't. It's just something that is there, and sometimes it just gets the best of her, and she lets it control her, and that's kind of what happened. She got into a blood frenzy, started killing a bunch of them, and then we saw what happened. So that explains why Shalltear had kind of a lack of intelligence in some ways when it came to her appearance or her actions in this episode, the way she was acting. Now that I've explained that, when it comes to the other things, like some of the setup in this episode with, like, you know, the ending part with how she revolted, like, you know, she went against Ainz and them, I think that will be clarified in next week's episode, so I shouldn't really have to take the time to actually explain that right now. Depending on how Madhouse does it next week, I will talk about or not talk about, depending, you know, how the information is given. So I'm not going to really talk about that much towards the ending. But the other thing I want to talk about is Brain. This is one of the main things I think a lot of people are kind of upset with, because there was supposed to be a very hyped up fight with this week's episode of Overlord. Now, let me clarify. In last week's episode with the overpowered hug of Ainz, we had it to where Clementine mentioned someone called Brain. She did mention him while she was going to fight Ainz. That was mentioned in last week's episode or the episode before that. She briefly mentions the strongest warriors in the kingdom. And so Brain was popped up, and so he's one of the strongest warriors. And so, of course, we do know that when it comes to the Nazarick forces, they're really too OP. Like, they're way too fucking strong, and nobody really stands up against them if they really were serious. For instance, if Ainz and them were serious, nobody stands against Nazarick and their forces. And so, to see this, we kind of understand would have been a curb stomp, but there should have been a little bit more emphasis on the curb stomp, along with Brain's efforts to really fight such a overpowering being. For instance, Shalltear. Because the slice is one of the main things that was slightly cut out. Like the God slice he did, like with that big, fast slice, he was supposed to talk about how this is something he's been training for a very long time. He's put a lot of effort, a lot of training. He spent hundreds of hours trying to train this ability, and he finally got it to where he's going to use it up against Shalltear. And then all of a sudden, you know, Shalltear grabs it, and then she goes around and grabs the blade by the back to showcase that she's just that damn fast. She can grab his fastest attack while going around and taking her time and grabbing it from behind. That goes to show you how fast Shalltear is. But the way they went about it in this episode didn't really emphasize how crazy that slash was and how OP Shalltear was in that way. So those are the main points I want to talk about. Now that I've discussed that, I think I can now get into the episode. So, the episode's main point was telling the story from Shalltear's perspective. For instance, seeing why she turned against Nazarick and Ainz. Because as we found out at the end of last week's episode, we were announced that Shalltear has turned against Ainz, and then Ainz is like, wait, what? And then, you know, episode ends. So this episode, the entire time, was showing the point of view of Shalltear and what led up to the events of when Ainz found out that she turned against him. And so, that's kind of what this is. This is like a flashback episode, which I'm glad was in and adapted in this episode, because, I mean, I'm glad we got to see some clarification to what happened and what is probably going to happen next. But the thing is, okay, with the way the episode was done, we have multiple things going on here from this point of view. We have it to where Shalltear is on a mission, she's trying to do her own thing, along with, you know, getting to see all the different maids and butlers doing what they want to do. For instance, Solution, oh my god, Solution. I'll get into her in a moment. But we have it to where each of our characters are doing their own mission that Ainz assigned them, and that's kind of what they're doing in this episode. And I felt like some of the ways this episode was going, it didn't really try to clarify exactly what Shalltear was doing or not. Hopefully it might clarify maybe, you know, next week. That's why I'm not going to really talk about it much. Maybe it might get clarified. But for now, I noticed that's kind of how the episode was. Back on topic though, Solution, the blonde-haired maid. Oh my. That is best girl. I'm just gonna say right now, that is best girl. Solution is best girl in the series. I mean, look at how that dude died in this episode. He was embraced by the slime Opie and sucked in and then died. He's gone. I guess it's not one of the worst ways to die, so to say. I mean, you could be the guy in this episode that got, you know, his juices sucked out of him by Shalltear. I mean, I guess that would be kind of a bad way to go. But, I mean, at the very least, the dude that died inside of Solution, he could survive for 2 days, which is something I want to talk about. So, I guess, conversation with Solution and this dude that got killed in this episode, there was supposed to be a little bit more dialogue explaining what Solution was, and also how fucked up this situation is. For instance, Solution is a slime, and I think that's kind of clarified because you saw how the dude was just sinking inside of her. But Solution can control the acid inside of her body to where the dude can live for multiple days. Up to 2 days, this dude can be kept alive inside a Solution. And there was supposed to be a scene to where the dude stuck his, like, arm out of her face. Like, I remember it in the light novel. He was supposed to stick his arm out of her face, and it's supposed to pop out, and, like, he's sitting there wiggling and screaming, which I can understand. Censorship reasons is probably because why they got axed out of this episode, because Madhouse can't show everything. I mean, they even had some censorships when it came to the head being cut off, to the arm hitting the floor. I mean, there was some censorship, and of course, BDs and DVDs will fix that up when it does come out. So I'm not really concerned about the censorship, but I feel like when it came to the Solution scene, when the dude was inside of her, that was supposed to probably be very graphic, and most likely Madhouse decided on the decision of, no, we can't show this. It's just too damn graphic, and it goes into some form of fucked up content, and I can understand that. But Solution, though, is a scary son of a bitch, and I like her. Best girl. She is best girl of the series. So, now that I've covered Brain's fights, gotten to cover, let's see, the Solution to the bandits, let's see. We have it to where one of the main problems going on this episode is that there was 2 humans that escaped from Shalltear. And the reason why this is so dire, and why this is such a huge issue, and why Shalltear is getting so upset, is because if someone finds out about Shalltear being around, for instance, this overpowered vampire, what do you think the normal human reaction is going to be? Like, for instance, let's just say there's information and rumors spread around that there's a strong being in the forest that killed someone, and then they got somewhat evidence and these rumors start spreading around. Of course, it's going to cause some problems, for instance, for Nazarick, because that would mean Shalltear could never show her face in public and sneak around because she's already been revealed to the common eye. And this is quite the issue, because this can, like, I guess, cause some issues for Ainz to where he can't get his information properly as an adventurer. So you get my point what I'm getting at. So this is a dire situation of why some people were actually escaping, and that's why Shalltear kind of rushed to them to try to take them down real quick, because, yeah, that's a huge issue. It can actually harm Ainz in certain ways. Now, I'm not going to actually clarify what happened to Shalltear at the end of the episode, because, as Ainz said, there's no way an undead should be able to have their status effects, for instance, messed with, like, get feared or controlled, because they are undead. For instance, undead shouldn't be able to get messed with as fear, control undead, stuff like that. So, not going to get into that. I'll save it for next week. So, tell me your thoughts in the comments below. You all have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. Please be safe. Chibi out.